Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Alia Marrero Alatar. I'm a junior here at the college studying government and history and literature, and I'm the director of outreach for the JFK Junior Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on the park side and the JFK Street side. In the case of an emergency, please congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming college undergraduate Natasha Pereira.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here at the Institute of Politics. My name is Natasha Pereira, and I'm a sophomore at the college studying economics and history, and a member of the Student Forum Committee. Tonight, I want to talk about something that makes many Americans uneasy. Not because it is unimportant, but because it's being handled without the discipline and the candor that the public deserves: immigration. Every nation has a right to enforce its laws and to know who enters its borders. That principle is neither radical nor partisan. It's as old as this republic itself. Governments that abandon that principle do not remain free and do not remain generous for long. Americans understood this when they cast their vote in the 2024 presidential election. They voted for broad immigration reform without spectacle, without deception, and without turning neighbor against neighbor. But as we see today, the national conversation around ICE has shifted. After videos of senseless force and after the loss of 2 American citizens, many Americans are beginning to reject the notion that this is a normal exercise of power. To shed some light on this historical moment, 2 experts will join us in the forum this evening: Jeh Johnson, former Secretary of Homeland Security, and Juliette Kayyem, Senior Lecturer in International Security and former Assistant Secretary for Governmental Affairs at the DHS. Jeh Johnson served as the 4th U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security from 2013 to 2017. And in that role, he oversaw one of the largest government organizations, tackling issues like cybersecurity, counterterrorism, border security, disaster response, and immigration. Prior to that role, he served as the General Counsel to the Department of Defense and the General Counsel to the U.S. Air Force. Juliette Kayyem is the Balfour Senior Lecturer in International Security at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, right here, where she focuses on Homeland Security and crisis management. She previously served as the Assistant Secretary at the DHS under President Obama and as Massachusetts' first Homeland Security Advisor. She's also CNN's Senior National Security Analyst. From its founding, this country has depended on the rule of its law and the courage of its citizens to challenge it. Tonight's conversation belongs to that uniquely American tradition. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of applause to welcome tonight's guests to the forum. Thank you.
Hi. Okay, well, we have a packed house. It must be interesting. Hello, Jeh, Secretary. Nice to see you again, and welcome back.
Thank you.
Not in Natasha's fantastic bio and intro was that you were a senior fellow here at the Homeland Security program when you left the department. So it's nice to have you back. I want to set the stage for a conversation that we will have with you, but just set the stage for sort of what are we seeing and what is going on in terms of immigration. So I think it's safe to say that of one of the 3 major issues that are responsible for why Donald Trump is president again, immigration is one of them. That was just a narrative that brought him forward. Part of that was the nature of immigration enforcement by the Biden administration, and part of it was just creating a narrative that may not have been reflected in reality, but a narrative about immigration. In 2025, just safe to say, January 20th, 2025, we entered the new era of immigration enforcement. Rapid deportation operations and absolute policy shifts, 180s policy shifts under Donald Trump. In the first 100 days, just to give you, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, arrested over 66,000 individuals and removed almost 65,000 of them. These are numbers that we generally have not seen. It has calling it the largest mass deportation in American history, and it's using tactics and enforcement priorities, sweeping executive directives, and other efforts like third country removal. So that's sort of the lay of the land right now. Consistent with that, or supporting that, is of course a massive increase in how much money is going to one sliver of the Department of Homeland Security, and that's generally ICE, CBP, just call it immigration enforcement. About over 250% boost. I looked at I looked at the numbers, and now I've lost. Okay, so we went from 6 billion to 85 billion in one single budget shift. So if you don't, I mean, that's just a reflection.
They don't know what to do with that much.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's a reflection of Donald Trump's priorities. That will represent that has already represented 120% increase in manpower at ICE alone. Does not include CBP, FBI, other people who are involved with immigration. These numbers are not deniable. We could have debates about what they mean. It's just simply this is the massive amount of increasing of personnel across the United States. The data simply shows that 2025 marked a pivotal moment in how we thought about immigration, interior immigration, while, to their credit, if you support this, the Trump administration essentially was successful in closing off unlawful migration across the border. You may agree or disagree with it. So what you saw was almost zero here, and all the effort going to interior enforcement. That's just the lay of the land. So we're not talking about borders anymore. Of the interior enforcement deportation, 72% of the people now deported had no criminal convictions. Only 5% had violent criminal convictions. So the worst of the worst, that narrative did not hold. These are the numbers coming from DHS. I went on their website. Okay, then 2026 comes around. And Milwaukee comes around. I was trying to figure out how to start this with you. And I'm going to make it very basic. Describe to me what you're seeing in the streets of Milwaukee.
Well, where do I begin? First of all, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many interested people in this topic. So when I look at I've been out of office nine years now. By the way, I make a great trivia question. Who was Donald Trump's first Secretary of Homeland Security? It was me, because on January 20, 2017, I was the designated survivor. I got picked for that duty twice, including January 20. So I had to stay in office an extra 7 hours and 32 minutes past noon until somebody in his cabinet was appointed. So for 7.5 hours, I was the entirety of Donald Trump's cabinet. A law professor here said to me, "Why didn't you invoke the 22nd Amendment when you had the chance?" So anyway, I look at the videos, and video images, whether it's newsreel or an iPhone, don't always accurately depict the full picture of what's happening in a particular city or community. But when I look at the videos of the killing of Alex Preddy and the videos of the killing of Renee Good, I see a force, ICE, CBP, that I don't recognize, including, even though some of them have been with DHS for at least 10 years, so meaning they worked for me, I don't recognize them. I see an angry, ill-trained, undisciplined force that looks like they've come for a fight and that they have lost their way. They're supposed to be there to enforce the immigration laws. And what I see are people who have been amped up by the rhetoric of their leadership, looking for a fight with the community in Minneapolis. And it really does matter the tone that leadership sets. I used to say all the time when I was secretary, ICE, enforcement and removal operations, Tom Homan included, when you're on the streets, use your common sense, because one notorious incident, pulling a 5-year-old out of school or grabbing somebody's grandmother off the church steps, can derail your mission in a community. You become toxic in a community. And we're seeing that today in spades. I feel as though they've lost their way and have become toxic in the community. You know, 10 years ago, when I was in office, I could carry my DHS gym bag on the Acela with me. And people would come up to me and say, "Thank you for keeping us safe." And I'm sure that was true in the first Obama term. Now, I wouldn't dare wear anything that says DHS on it. When we lived in Washington, I collected all these hats and all these jackets, and one night my daughter, who was a teenager then, had the bright idea. She wanted to wear my Border Patrol hat to a party in Washington, D.C., because she liked the color scheme. And I said, "Are you sure you want to wear a Border Patrol hat?" And she literally got chased out of the party then. That was then, 10 years ago. They've lost their way. And somebody has got to put this back in the bottle. It feels like, I'm not there, I haven't been there, but it feels to me like Minneapolis is an occupied territory right now.
I mean, that's how it's...
Thousands of... There's been no recent great surge of migrants into Minneapolis. And those thousands of DHS personnel could be doing something else. Like, you know, all those Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis should be on the border. So anyway, I could go on and on.
But one of the things, I'm glad you mentioned that there's sort of a narrative about what's going on. And part of this is just sort of what is the reality out there, that like, this is a training problem, right? Oh, all these guys are coming on and they're getting, you know, they used to get 7 months of training and now they're getting 42 days and blah, 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 which is all true.
Yep.
Okay, so the two guys who killed Preddy were 8 and 10 years, as you said, in the service. I think Renee Good was 7. I think at least 2 of them were CBP, not ICE. So we're sort of focused on this crutch of training. But if you were thinking about, how would you think about getting this ship straight? Or is it just the mission now? So
most law enforcement officers, New York City Police Department, Boston Police, you could be in the police force for 20 years with a firearm and never point your gun at anybody in a hostile manner, or let alone shoot it, except on training. The consistent thread through good policing in a big city are tactics in de-escalation. Know how to de-escalate a tense confrontation. You know, I see this, you know, when I'm in the subway station in Times Square in New York, for example, and there's somebody homeless who's getting very agitated, and the cops just let him kind of act out, let everybody calm down. Tactics in de-escalation are so important. You know, Renee Good did not have to die. Renee Good died because she was blocking her vehicle, supposedly preventing a removal operation from taking place. I know lots of good cops that would just sit, you know, they would know how to de-escalate that situation. George Floyd, 5-6 years ago, died over a $20 counterfeit bill. Eric Garner, somebody here might know about Eric Garner, Staten Island, 2014, died from a chokehold over a carton of cigarettes. So law enforcement, whether you're state, local, or federal, have to learn tactics in de-escalation. That is so fundamental if you carry a gun. And the last thing I'll say, I am very disturbed to see online from my old department recruitment tools, recruitment messages that say, defend your culture. Now, to me, that's a dog whistle. Defend your culture. You look at this room, this is a multicultural room. And when you see things like, imagine those of us who are like my age, imagine if you saw a recruitment brochure for the Mississippi State Police, 1963, that said, defend your culture. I think you'd know what that means. And so, defend your culture doesn't speak to the Mexican American in South Texas who might want a career in law enforcement. Doesn't speak to the Muslim American in Michigan or Minnesota who might want a career in law enforcement. Basically, you need not apply. And so I think that there has to be, for this beleaguered cabinet department and these beleaguered law enforcement agencies, and we'll talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about whether or not ICE should be abolished. But it has to come from the top. Leadership has to reset the tone.
Right, and I think we can assume, it's interesting, I think we can assume that's not gonna happen. So let me just, polling is polling, but it's just worth knowing. Trump was wildly popular on immigration, sort of across the board. He was viewed as getting it, right? And he, as I said, he did when it came to the border. So silver lining of this period, so now that's down to 37 or 36%, that most Americans view him as unsuccessful on that. You could debate the polling. It's just, he's just lost that issue. That has nothing to do with the border. People are that lowering, people are talking about interior enforcement. And if I could think of beginning to think of a silver lining, it is that I think most Americans, about 80% of Americans, if you put all the pieces together, want stronger borders, but don't like this, right? They like the worst of the worst, take them out of prison, to do all of that stuff. This we don't like. Okay, so now I want to rewind a little bit. The opposition to Trump lost on the borders. And when you look back at Biden, you were part of the administration, or Democrats generally, before we get to abolish ICE, which may resonate, what do you, be honest with you, if you just look at the data, Biden, it wasn't just the narrative, Biden lost the border. And Trump sort of picked it up. So what is the best equilibrium between enforcement and a reflection of the society that you see in this room?
So I've concluded that the best immigration policy is one that you hear almost nothing about from either the right or the left. Or maybe the best immigration policy is when both sides are screaming at you. The hard lesson that I learned when it comes to border security is that, and Mike Chertoff first told me this, is illegal immigration across our southern border is a very information-sensitive phenomenon. It reacts quickly to perceived changes in our enforcement policy on the southern border. So if we are perceived as getting tough, the numbers drop. If we are perceived as soft, the numbers shoot up. But they always, so long as the push factors exist in Central and South America, they always revert back to their longer term trend lines. So for example, In May 2014, I was in office about 6 months, and we had a spike at the southern border, principally South Texas, principally families and unaccompanied kids. It was a new phenomenon, it was a new demographic. And we put out messaging about dangers of sending your child through Mexico into the United States. We tightened down our enforcement policy, and the numbers dropped dramatically, like that, such that my second year in office, we had the second lowest number of illegal crossings since 1972, 315,000. And then the numbers started to creep up again. Yep. So by 2016, they were creeping up because the push factors persist. Trump came into office, the big bad wolf comes into office, and the numbers went like that again. And then he tried family separation. Family separation actually had, if you look at the numbers, actually had very little deterrent effect. And Trump's second year in office, or third, by 2019, there were 1 million crossings in 1 year, on his watch, 1 million. Now the numbers are down to the lowest levels on record. Yeah. But so long as the push factors persist, eventually they're going to revert back to their longer term trend lines, no matter who's in office, whether it's Trump or Biden or anybody else. And the other thing about border security, which I've learned, is I went to Laredo, Texas. This is an aha moment. And I was touring the community, 80% Mexican-American, 80% Democratic, Laredo, Texas. And the local congressman there, Henry Cuellar, said to me, it's an overwhelmingly blue community, but people here want border security. Yeah. They want the border under control. An 80% Mexican-American community, they want the border under control. And I believe that, put aside all the racist crap, great replacement and everything else, I believe a secure border is a legitimate government objective. Americans are entitled to know who's coming into our country. When it comes to the interior, when we talk about the worst of the worst, getting the worst of the worst, yeah, that was my objective too. Mm-hmm. And the current approach actually undermines that in two ways. One, by diverting into one place, one community, all these enforcement personnel, they're not doing their jobs elsewhere. And second, when ICE becomes toxic in a community, the locals don't want to work with them anymore. The mayor, the city councils all pass ordinances and laws saying, we will not work with ICE. Yeah. Governor Hochul in New York is on this now. She's running for re-election, so she's on. We should have legislation that forbids the New York City Police from working with ICE. That means no detainers, so you can't get at the worst of the worst who are sitting in jails and for their sentence or pretrial. So that undermines public safety to have an occupying force that is toxic in that community.
So 3 more years of presumably this policy. I mean, it might change if there's a midterm switch, or it might get more oversight. Mm-hmm. But when you look out in the world, I always tell my students, don't wish for a world that doesn't exist, right? We should do this. It is not happening. What do you think is going to be do you think there are any checks on this that we could anticipate in the years ahead? Is it the business community? Is it tourism and those numbers?
Yeah, it's called an election.
You think that will be, that's it?
Yeah, 2026 and 2028. Ultimately, I wrote this in an op-ed a couple years ago, and there were calls to abolish ICE. I said, you can't abolish the agency responsible for enforcing our immigration laws in the interior. If we don't like the policies, we don't like the way they're going about their business, you change the policies. And if the leaders don't change the policies, you change the leaders. To change the leaders, you got to vote.
Yeah, but okay, so I'm going to push you on that, though. You just said, like, the brand of ICE, for people who don't know, it's so bad. The U.S. Olympic team is in Milan. They have their social house that was called Winter Olympics, the Ice House.
Yep.
They had to change it yesterday to the Winter House because they didn't want any protesters. So the brand is bad, and it's impacting
terrible.
ICE, literally, lowercase I. Okay, so give me, if not abolish ICE, I'm going to turn you into a political consultant.
Yeah.
If not abolish ICE, which has appeal, people know what it means, what's the bumper sticker? Because this looks really bad. And I'm not just talking as a Democrat. I was like, I don't see how this gets unwound.
No, it's the worst it's ever been in terms of the brand. When I was secretary, you remember the Secure Communities program?
Yeah.
Secure Communities was getting the feds to work with local law enforcement to get at the worst of the worst. And Secure Communities became toxic.
Yeah.
Just the very words, Secure Communities. But it was a worthy government objective. So I changed the brand from Secure Communities to the Priorities Enforcement Program. And like everything in Washington, you make it into an acronym, PEP. And so we tweaked the policy, but we changed the brand. ICE is so toxic now that I'm going to give you the deeper answer.
Yeah.
I think that, I haven't said this too many times publicly, but I'll say it now. I think that the whole Department of Homeland Security is outdated. The model is outdated. DHS was created in 2002 by an act of Congress, principally to deal with counterterrorism in the wake of 9/11. And at the time, the conventional wisdom was that terrorism was an extraterritorial threat from beyond our borders. And so if you consolidate into one cabinet-level department, the regulation of all the different ways bad guys can enter this country, land, Border Patrol, sea, Coast Guard, air, TSA, and at the ports, customs, you will have effectively dealt with terrorism because you'll keep all the bad guys out. That model is now outdated because terrorism now can be foreign-inspired or homegrown. And we largely degraded, decapitated Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They could always come back. And then, like in Washington, in some respects with DHS, they went too far, and in some respects, they didn't go far enough. So counterterrorism, and then they added cybersecurity, FEMA, the Secret Service, and a few other agencies. And people look at it and say, this makes no sense. And so, and that model is outdated. And many secretaries, including myself, never like to admit that you've got all these missions, but the immigration mission is the thing that overwhelms us.
Every time.
Maybe 50% or more of our time. So if I were king, and I could just reorganize government with a stamp, I would have, the civil libertarians would go crazy. I would have one big Department of Public Safety at the federal level, or public security, domestic security, whatever you want to call it, into which we put every single federal law enforcement agency, ICE, CBP, FBI. FBI would go kicking and screaming because they have a fair amount of autonomy in DOJ. DEA, ATF, the Marshal Service, and deconflict all their missions, give them one intelligence directorate to support their mission, and leave all the lawyers in DOJ. To me, it makes too much sense, which is why it'll never happen. But the current DHS model is frankly outdated. Every once in a while, there are calls to put the Secret Service back in Treasury.
Yeah, that's right. That's the biggest, that's as far as they get.
No, it's not a good idea because, as you know, Juliette, during a surge like the UN General Assembly, Secret Service has got to go to HSI and these other agencies that are in DHS, and so that's good to have that all under one cabinet department. And then, you know, HSI wants to be out from under ICE and report directly to the Secretary, but I think there needs to be some type of realignment.
So, but I want to keep pushing on abolish ICE because there is, okay, so it's, I mean, do you claw back the money? I mean, is it just too big, too fast? And if you think it can be reformed internally, what would you demand? Not Republican or Democrat, but like if you make the most convincing case to a skeptic saying this thing can't exist, the way it looks now, that of keeping ICE, but what reform does it need? Is it just leadership?
Leadership and, you know, new priorities, focus on the criminals. You know, there are a whole lot of people in this country, the estimates when I was in office were 11, 12 million. I'm sure it's much
higher
larger
now.
Who've been here for 5, 10, 20 years, entered illegally, have committed no crimes, have U.S. citizen kids.
Yeah.
Who are de facto Americans, who want to be accountable, who want to get on the books and pay taxes. I know people like this. And so we've got to deal with these people. It makes no sense at this point to send them back to Mexico because their families, this is all they know, this country, they're de facto Americans. So, you know, the comprehensive immigration reform bill that made it out of the Senate but not the House in 2013 was a very good start at addressing both border security and how to deal with people who are already here, who've been here for years. As you know, through executive actions, President Obama and I tried to create a program similar to DACA called DAPA, Deferred Action for Parenthood Arrivals, people in this class that I just talked about who've been here for years and committed no crimes, and immediately went to court. A little bit of forum shopping. The lawsuit by the states was brought in the Brownsville division of the Southern District of Texas before the one judge there, Andrew Hanen, who's very pro-enforcement. He enjoined DAPA. It went up to the Supreme Court, and there was a tie, 4-4. On the constitutionality of it because Scalia's seat was empty. It was a tie. So, which means the injunction was not reversed. But we have to deal with this population, and trying to meet some arbitrary daily quota makes zero sense because these people are not going to, you're not going to find them at their last known address.
Well, I mean, I think that is, it's interesting when you start to look at the data and how the American public is turning against this interior enforcement actions. These are not pro-open border constituencies. These are constituencies that some of them are quite conservative. So it strikes me that if politically, if you were looking for a middle lane, it is part Trump, part Biden, essentially, that you don't do the aggressive interior enforcement, this horrible stuff we're seeing, but you get more serious about border enforcement at the border. More serious is unfair, but that you begin to bring those numbers down. Does that seem plausible in the future?
Yes, it does. In an effort to get comprehensive immigration reform, our former boss, President Obama, did not mind too much the heat that he took for deporting lots of people.
Deporter-in-chief.
Right. And in an effort to get comprehensive immigration reform, I think Janet must have convinced him, you really need to do this.
Yeah.
And he did in the first term. And
Secretary
in the second
Napolitano
term.
is who I worked for in the first term, and Secretary Johnson came the second term. So
right. So, I mean, you have to be willing to take grief from all sides in order to find the right balance, the right policy, and it's everybody's in the White House, certainly it's everybody's least favorite subject.
Yeah.
And it consumes us politically, thanks to President Trump.
Yeah. I have a few more minutes for you. So you gave a very striking view of what the department should be. But I'm sitting amongst people who, while they might be horrified or complimentary of what's happening out in the streets in Minnesota, if I look at the polling, most people in this room really, really worry about climate. Going to do a little end twist here. As you think about the department and whether it can be saved, what does the department look like in the future? Is the climate agenda for the department just not a sane way to think about the risks that we're facing in the future, or does it stay?
Well, the risk that we are facing cuts across many missions and departments of our government. It's not just DHS, it's not just immigration law enforcement. It's trying to fire presidential appointees with a statutory term. It's impoundment of money that Congress has appropriated. It's extrajudicial killing on the high seas of low-level drug couriers. I could go on and on. And I come back to where I started. You know, we're still a democracy. And so long as the popular vote reflects the popular will, because people don't stay home like they did in 24, we can change the direction, we can change the course that we're on right now. But I worry that in the midterms and in 28, people are going to be disenchanted, turned off. The most depressing survey I see is the Pew Trust in Government survey. In the late 1950s, early 1960s, Americans' trust in government, you know, do you trust your government to do the right thing? It was like 70%. Now it's in the teens, maybe, due to a lot of factors over several generations. And so, in one respect, social media, I think, has got people more engaged politically, but they're more conspiracy-minded, more divided, and a lot of people, for some reason, in 24 stayed home. So we're still a democracy, but so much of our constitutional order is gray. The First Amendment, which embodies the principle of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, academic freedom, freedom of religion, is 42 words in a comma. But those huge principles that exist on this campus are just 42 words. And the reason why our democracy, our constitutional order has survived for as long as it's survived is because we have elected people who respect the Constitution and the law, but constitutional norms and legal norms as well. when you elect somebody who has none of the sense of that history, does not observe constitutional or legal norms, we're in real trouble. So, you know, the starkest example is birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment has been understood for centuries to mean anybody born in this country is a U.S. citizen, except if you're the child of an ambassador. Somebody in the current administration looked at the 14th Amendment and says, hey, where does it say that? And decided to make it a test case. And, you know, well, we got 6 appointees on the Supreme Court, let's give it a shot and see what happens. That's what happens when people in power don't respect constitutional norms.
I think a lot about what happened in Milwaukee, what's going on there. Did the administration actually change? And so I want to just end with a quick reflection that if I looked at what was happening, the killings and I called it kill and slander, the killings and then the slander against the 2 victims, I think really was a revulsion for a lot of Americans. But why did Preddy's killing seem to impact the nation in such a way, if you just look at? And, it was interesting. I think part of it is we talk a lot about engagement, voting, whatever, but I hate when they call him a protester, because I think what's interesting for those of you who think about how you want to effectuate change is the mission in Milwaukee did have a purpose. It wasn't just about protest. It was about videotaping what you saw. It was about delivering food. It was about telling community members what was going on. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that one can be angry, but to be successful, one should focus on a mission. And I think actually Preddy and Good both were doing that. They weren't mere protesters. But we'll see how this unfolds. I want to thank Secretary Johnson for giving us a lot to think about what is happening and what it might look like in the future. So thank you. Don't worry, I'm getting to questions. I just want to thank him first. Sorry, I did that. I'm going to thank him again. Okay, so we have 4 sets of microphones here, and here, and I have a set of rules for everyone. They apply equally. State your name if you're comfortable, or something to that effect. If you can introduce yourself, give Secretary Johnson a sense of why you're here. We ask that you actually ask a question and you ask it quickly. Thank you. Not you specifically, one generally.
Hello.
This is a little bit of a long question, but I'm Helen. I'm a freshman at the college, and I want to thank you for coming and sharing your expertise. I've spent a considerable amount of time talking to immigrant families. I work as an ICE hotline operator, and I've also attended immigration court quite a lot in Mass and in my hometown. Mm-hmm. So in 2016, estimates found that there were up to 15,000 asylum seekers in ICE custody every day during your tenure. And the push factors that you were talking about in Central and South America, a lot of the times are not abstract. They're things like violence, persecution, rape, torture. In a country that prides itself on the right to a free trial, 86% of detainees during your tenure were unable to obtain legal representation. And similar to current DHS practices, expedited removal procedures were done during your tenure so that people, even if they did have a valid asylum case, did not have the time or the chance to argue for it. Your detention centers were operated by the same private prison companies that are currently operating now that people are dying in, and reports during your tenure found subpar medical conditions, and these led to many deaths that were reported. But still, this might have been the best immigration policy that you spoke of that people didn't really know about. Not to mention the deaths that were caused after the fact.
It has nothing to do with what you're talking about. It's literally just if you could get to a question.
Yeah, I'm almost there. Not to mention the deaths and family separation that came after the fact of deportation. My question is, do you recognize these as systemic moral failings of the DHS that extend beyond Trump?
To a large degree, yes, I do. I'm not going to kid you about that. What I will say, first of all, the concept of family separation, as you probably know, the concept of family separation was presented to me when I was in office. And I said, no, we're not doing that. I encouraged Tom Homan and others to bring me all lawful options for how we deal with the border, no matter how crazy you think I might think it is. And so that was a concept that was presented to me. And when you're at the cabinet level in Washington, you have to govern at the macro level, but always try to be mindful of the faces and the plights and the situations of people like the type of people that you're familiar with. And so when I'd go to Border Patrol holding stations, I'd meet families, I'd meet kids, and I would literally have tears in my eyes. And I'd want to like scoop up all these kids and bring them home with me on my plane, but I couldn't. But I always tried to, once I got back to Washington, I always tried to remember vividly what I saw, who I met, and who I spoke to and what they said. So when the idea of family separation was presented to me, I had a very vivid image of a young woman, maybe 19, 20 years old, with a 2 or 3 month old baby that she was clinging to. And I knew I couldn't ask a Border Patrol agent or an ICE agent to pull that child away from its mother. I just couldn't do that. So that's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you. I'm going to go here.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ruhi. I'm a student here at HKS, and my question relates to your comments sort of at the beginning about, your objective being to put things back in the bottle, and Professor Kayyem's comments about branding and how we're thinking about ICE. And, as an immigrant and a U.S. citizen, it seems like a lot of the recent conversation around the branding of ICE being negative is because U.S. citizens are dying, and I wanted to ask about, how the history of people dying specifically in ICE detention factors into your understanding of branding and what it means to put things back in the bottle. Because like last year, Alligator Alcatraz was created, and even before that, the conditions in ICE detention have been horrific, and there have been so many preventable deaths. Is this a conversation that you are having? Is your objective politically to, essentially primarily protect U.S. citizens, or are we also thinking about the constitutionality of, preventing cruel and unusual punishment from touching people who are undocumented and detained?
Well, public safety is a key aspect of the mission of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, but we have to do our best to be fair and humane to people regardless of their status, which is why I spent so much time in immigration detention facilities on the border, in the interior, to have a very vivid sense myself for what you are talking about. And so being fair and humane and compassionate doesn't stop with U.S. citizenship. And so, apparently with this administration, I guess it does, but maybe even goes beyond that. But I think that it's part of who we are as a nation. We are a nation of immigrants. My favorite line, which I used to repeat at naturalization ceremonies, was from President Ronald Reagan. The uniqueness about our country is you can go to Japan and never be Japanese, you can go to Germany and never be German, but you can come to America and be an American. We're a multicultural society that includes a whole lot of people who are not citizens. Yeah. And that's not going to change anytime soon. And people who are here, who are contributing to our society, who happen to not be citizens, are perhaps as vital as those who are citizens.
And you raise a good point, though, about I just was looking at the numbers. I think we've got 4 times as many people in detention who have died, and I think some of them are suspected murders in ICE detention, and it's worth noting. I wanted to just say one thing on the branding, because I could tell that you were getting, I think one of the things that we're trying to push is if abolish ICE is pleasing, I mean, a good way, like it is, this thing, I struggle with it, this thing should not exist, but you need some form of enforcement mechanism. What does that look like? What do you call that? I think that's where we were talking about, because abolish ICE will animate our politics for a long time. And the data I was sharing with you all, the American public is not there. Parts of the American public are there. So that's just the challenge now. Hi, up there.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
So Dwight Hutchins, Kennedy School grad back in the 90s, current Dean's Counsel. I guess my question comes from a couple of places. One, context. My mother's an immigrant. I have her nationalization on my wall. My wife's a green card holder. And I am old enough to have worked with the Office of Homeland Security and Tom Ridge. Yeah. And you said that it's outdated, which kind of strikes me as like, it's only 25 years old, right? So, I mean, the Department of Agriculture is 160. So when you say it's outdated, it took me back to the conversations around, not so much that it's outdated, but there were flaws in the setting up of it. And, whether it was the Patriot Act or all of the concerns about what were we unleashing, had we really vetted this and thought this through. And some of the things that we're seeing were foreshadowed back then. And so my question to you is, not so much put the genie back in the bottle, because nobody wants that bottle, is, if you were king for a day, you already said, okay, you put all law enforcement in one place, maybe put immigration somewhere else, but, how would you, and you said immigration consumes way too much oxygen, what would a path towards something look like, as opposed to trying to, do a DACA here or do an enforcement action there? 20 million people here, million people a day show up at the borders. What does it look like to get to a consensus solution and a policy framework to enforce it?
Thank you.
So I could spend a lot of time trying to answer that. One of the problems is the people who have the people in Washington who have the ear of the policymakers in Washington don't always reflect the great consensus of the viewpoints of the American people. And which is why I always make the point about how most Americans want border security. Even a lot of Hispanic Americans want border security who live in border communities. And I think that one of the mistakes that was made in the previous presidential election is Democrats didn't talk enough about border security. I think they were afraid to talk about border security. I went on Fox, one of the few people that you'll ever meet who goes on both Morning Joe and Fox and Friends. And I went on Fox and I said, you know what, I'm going to say something that her campaign will not say. I believe Kamala Harris will be tougher on the border than Biden was. And, of course, everybody on Fox went nuts, but I said it. And I think that the way, look, the elections are all about winning swing voters. 45% of the electorate is firmly over here, and the other 45% is firmly over there. And then there's that 10% in the middle who live in the 7 swing states in this country. We could name them. And So our election is decided by a very small minority of voters in swing states, not Massachusetts, not New Jersey where I live, not New York, not Washington, D.C., not California. And most of those swing voters also believe that we need to have a secure border, but let's treat the people who are here fairly and humanely. Now, that seems to be in conflict. That seems to be inconsistent, but I don't believe it is, because that's the policy that we tried in the Obama administration. It wasn't perfect. A lot of people were mad at us, from the right and the left. But so long as we have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people trying to cross our border daily, weekly, monthly, and so long as we have something like 20 million undocumented people who are here now, we have to deal with both populations. You can't deal with only one and not the other. And you can't and you can't treat the 20 million who are here like they arrived yesterday.
Hi, my name is Jay-Z, and I'm an international student over at the School of Design. I would like to ask a question that very few Americans think about, which is legal immigration through skilled labor H-1B visa. The quota, 65,000, has not been raised since 1990.
Right.
And that is just a fathomably small number for so many people who wants to come to the US.
Yep.
As an international student, I have faced many systemic barriers. I completed my undergrad here in Maine, and I had many offers rescinded, even though I'm legally authorized to work. But the moment they hear that I'm a resident alien, you can see the smile disappear from their face. So you mentioned that, what's special about this country is anyone can come here and become American. I don't see it that way. Many other countries in our neighbor to the north and Australia, they have formed this national consensus that immigration is beneficial to this country. But I don't think America has that consensus anymore. Pod Save America floated this idea that the next Democratic president has the best shot in a long time to achieve comprehensive immigration reform. But I'm very pessimistic about it because there's no constituent to immigration reform. And I have doubts that it will ever go through Congress. So I would like to ask you on your opinion on this fundamental paradox when it comes to legislation.
So you're right that legal immigration is not mentioned enough in this whole debate. It's undocumented in the interior who ICE wants to round up and send home, and it's the border. And the less so now, but before, 10 years ago, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was all over this exact issue. It's good for business. Legal immigration, skilled workers, so much of innovation in this country came about through legal immigration. And it's an issue that does not get referred to enough because we're so focused on, everything on the extremes and not in the middle. And any comprehensive immigration reform has to also deal with this, raise the cap on the number of visas, because it's good for our country, it's good for the economy, it's good for higher education, but it doesn't get talked about enough. Maybe it shouldn't get talked about a whole lot, because you don't want certain people focused on it. But I also believe that present company aside, comprehensive immigration reform, I think a Republican administration is more likely to be able to make that happen than a Democratic administration. coming from a Republican president,
I think that's true.
with say a Democratic Congress during an off year, when politics are not, foremost, is the way to try to bring it about. But I've been wrong before, and I could be wrong again.
It is 7 o'clock. I'm going to allow 2 quick questions. Can you be very quick, and then quick answers, and then we'll let people go.
Thank you for your time. I'm an MBA candidate at the business school. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and my parents came to the United States and settled in Minneapolis, Minnesota 26 years ago, and I have called the Twin Cities of Minnesota home since. As I stood shoulder to shoulder with my neighbors this winter break after the killing of Renee Good in Powderhorn Park in South Minneapolis, I asked myself what it would take for future business and government leaders of not only our community, but in the nation to respond to this. And as you see, the response has been varied and disorganized in the last few weeks. My question to you is, in your positions, having held senior leadership positions, what type of engagement can we see from the medium and large-sized businesses and other social organizations that engage with the federal government to put pressure to actually deliver action to the communities and the families that need it most?
That's great. Quickly here, and then he'll answer both.
That's a good question.
Hi. I think mine actually might fit with that. So Jefferson Wilkes, also from the business school.
Good.
Putting aside the immigration policy and the ICE as an imperfect immigration enforcer, but more as an increasingly powerful political force, how do you see the opposition parties' levers of control, both as a minority party and potentially if they do gain a majority over the next few years, in either reining in, co-opting, disarming, or in some way countering that force, in a different way than potentially business as usual?
So I'm going to answer this question first. Anything that requires 60 votes in the Senate requires the opposition party. And there is also the libertarian strand of the Republican Party, Rand Paul. And what I see emerging among Republicans is an increasing willingness to adopt sort of the Rand Paul line. So, for example, if you're a conservative Republican, libertarian, true to your principles, you should be screaming up and down, objecting to any notion of federal takeover of elections in this country, which are run by states. In 2016, I decided to declare election infrastructure, critical infrastructure in this country. And state secretaries of state went nuts over this. You're trying to make a federal takeover of state elections, blah, 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 blah. So there's a strand of the Republican Party that, if it's true to its principles, ought to be voting with the opposition on this. Now, in answer to your question, I believe that big business has become gun-shy around politics in general, and are largely keeping their head down. And a lot of directors, outside directors of public companies, and I'm one, would say, yes, that's the right approach. Keep your head down. Sell consumer goods or whatever it is. Don't get involved in politics. The turning point is, first of all, images. Americans do react to images. Yeah. When you see the video of the killing of Alex Preddy, you see the video of the killing of Renee Good, you see the video of the killing of George Floyd. Ask yourself, for every one of those videos, how many hundreds of police reports exist where there was no camera, where somebody died, he had a cardiac incident, or something very benign like that. And video images are really powerful and have the ability to change the public mood. I mean, look what happened just within the last 2 weeks because of Alex Preddy. You don't need to be a law enforcement expert. You don't need to be the former Secretary of DHS to see that this guy was lying on his stomach, shot in the back 10 times after his weapon had been removed. You don't need to be a law enforcement expert to know that was wrong. That was, and there ought to be a criminal investigation. So I believe that images, I believe the iPhone camera, I believe has the ability to turn public opinion. And I may be an optimist in that regard. The other truism is that in politics, a month is a year, and a year is a decade. And so by October, we may be on to something else, who knows? Especially with this administration, at the pace at which there's this new thing that we all light our hair on fire about. So in December, it was extrajudicial killing. January, it's Minneapolis. Now it's federal takeover of the elections. Who knows where we'll be in 9 months? But photographic images do leave indelible impressions on people.
I mean, it's clearly that's what happened. I mean, the business community there was quiet after Good was killed. They couldn't ignore Preddy. I mean, you finally saw Target. I mean, it may not be as loud as you want it to be, but they finally came out after that. We need to say goodnight. It's past our bedtime here at the IOP. Secretary Johnson, thank you so much for this.
I want to say one more thing, please. One more thing. Please stay engaged.
Yeah.
Please participate, stay engaged. The whole reason I got involved in politics is one day when I was a college student, I stepped off a bus in Atlanta and I walked into Jimmy Carter's presidential headquarters on a whim. And I've been involved ever since. So please stay engaged.
Good parting words. Thank you. Thank you.